Sir, we wish to see Jesus. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. One of the most impressive features of the Château of Versailles in France and the ancient papal apostolic palace in Rome, which nowadays is part of the Sistine Chapel, is the succession of huge halls originally conceived with the sole aim of leading to the throne room. Delegations visiting the Pope when he was still the head of the Papal States would have walked through the gallery of maps, then the tapestry gallery, and finally the candelabra gallery, all designed to impress them and build up their expectations. The more prestigious the monarch, the more elaborate the etiquette visitors had to follow. Once they finally reached the throne room, the scene expecting them must have not been very dissimilar to that which is described in the Greek version of the book of Esther, where we are told that she, Esther, stood before the king, Ahasuerus, who sat upon his royal throne and was clothed with all his robes of majesty, all glittering with gold and precious stones, and he was very dreadful. Then, lifting up his countenance that shone with majesty, he looked very fiercely upon her, and the queen fell down and was pale and fainted, and bowed herself upon the head of the maid that went before her. Arguably, not all Pope's visitors were expected to faint on being introduced to his presence, but they had to be in awe. Hence, the deployment of halls, thrones, clothes, gold, precious stones to enhance the majesty that is the greatness of the monarch, to display his glory. Many of the Old Testament depictions of God represent him sitting on a throne and resplendent with majesty. When the prophet Isaiah describes his first encounter with God, he too uses this imagery. He sees the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filling the temple. There are angels proclaiming his holiness and his glory, and the prophet fears for his life because he thinks that he has seen the Lord and knows that nobody can survive this experience. Or sometimes can be too much. When John, at the beginning of his gospel, declares that nobody has ever seen God, he sums up the belief of most of biblical authors. If the glory of King Ahasuerus was such that Esther fainted, how much more would God's glory overwhelm any human being to the point of causing his death? Just as, for example, the brightness of the sun is such that if we look directly into it, we are blinded. Characteristically, however, the Old Testament reconstructs this worldly notion of majesty and glory when it applies it to God. And nowhere this process can be seen at work more suggestively than in the 33rd chapter of the book of Exodus, when Moses pleads with God not to give up on his people despite its apostasy after the episode of the golden calf. And God accepts this request out of friendship for Moses. It is a moment of great proximity between the two, and this emboldens Moses to put forward the two questions he had been burning to ask him. If I have found favor in your sight, first question, please show me now your ways. And then, second question, please let me see your glory, which, as the rest of the passage makes clear, is synonym with let me see your face. That is, let me see who you really are. And God, who by this stage cannot refuse anything to Moses, however cryptically, complies. To the question about his way of doing things, God replies, I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy, which confirms what he had declared elsewhere. God's ways are forgiveness and hesed, this beautiful Hebrew word that means tender, passionate, and affectionate love. As for seeing his face or glory, God replies, you cannot see my face, for humans shall not see me and live, but let's find another way. While my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back. Rabbinic commentators suggestively interpret seeing God's back in this way. We can perceive what God has done only retrospectively, looking back at the events of our life and of history. Now, all this is the background to the apparent innocent request by some Greek pilgrims who had come to Jerusalem for the celebration of Easter. We wish to see Jesus, they say. The rest of the passage is quite disorienting, and preaching on it is not easy, I can tell you. Jesus seems to ignore the request and instead talks of seeds, death, and especially glory. First, he declares, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Then he tells to the Father, glorify your name. And then the Father replies to him and says, I have glorified my name, and I will glorify it again. In what way is this talk of glory an answer to the request of the Greeks to see Jesus' face? From God's answer to Moses' request, we know that seeing God's face and seeing his glory are the same thing. So what is this glory? In the case of earthly kings, as we have seen, glory is prestige, power, wealth, and greatness signified by halls, thrones, clothes, gold, precious stones, elaborate etiquette. In God's case, glory is synonym of his ways of dealing with us, which means that for John 2, we can see who Jesus really is only by paying attention to the way he behaves with us, especially in his passion. The Hebrew word for glory is kabod, and its primary meaning is heavy in weight. Whenever I hear the word glory, I translate it with weight. The glory is the weight people carry in a community, the impact they have on others. Giving glory means acknowledging this, manifesting it with our deference and respect. And this is a metaphor common in our daily language. We refer to those who are able to influence people and affect their lives by saying that their opinion carries weight. The implication is that these people do not simply possess power, whether coming from a political office or wealth or strength. They also have what we call authority. That is, they do not owe their impact to us on coercion, but to their personal and relational qualities. Power can be conferred by law, by appointment, or by inheritance. As soon as someone is sworn President of the United States, she is invested with executive power and can act accordingly. Authority, on the contrary, needs to be earned, deserved, conquered over time, and depends on the authenticity of a leader, her wisdom, her ability to establish a connection with people, her steadiness. Most of the ability of a head of state, even as powerful as the President of the United States, to lead the world depends on her moral authority. We are drawn to listen, trust, and follow people with authority. We are glad to acknowledge that their views carry weight. So, if you ask someone, "Show me your power," the demonstration can be provided straight away. The person in question can have me arrested, or overpower me physically, or force me to do something without delay. On the contrary, if I ask someone, "Show me your authority," or your weight, or your glory, I will get an answer similar to what God said to Moses. "I am afraid you will have to wait and see." Which is the same answer Jesus gives to the Greeks who want to see him. "My glory, my authority, my weight, the way I will draw everyone to myself will be by dying like a grain of wheat, losing my life, loving and forgiving until the end." As we enter into the yearly celebration of the Lord's Passion, we should not assume that we can easily or at all make sense of it. However, many times we might have thought about this, meditated on the Passion narrative of the Gospels, read the theologians who have wrestled with this mystery. Once again, we find ourselves in the same position of Moses. That is, we can only ask the Lord to give us some insight into his ways. This year too, just like the Greeks, as we come to worship at the festival, we wish to see Jesus. That is, we would like to understand how today, 2,000 years after the execution of this obscure preacher from Palestine, we are still drawn towards him. We are still in awe of his glory. I ask this question to myself quite often, especially considering a contemporary Western secularized world where the default option is non-belief. How can the whole of my life be so impacted by him? How is it that I keep trusting the story of how he gave his life for us, and I want to reenact it once again in the liturgy this year with the whole church? What is the secret of such strength, such weight, such impact, such glory? The answer we are given is that we cannot really fathom this mystery, and we never will. And yet, we are not left with nothing. We are given another option. We can look back to our lives, to the history of Christianity, and maybe learn to perceive a bit better the ways in which, however slowly, God is indeed writing his law in our hearts. He is indeed drawing all of us to himself. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.